Okay, yeah, we're recording now.
Good evening and welcome to the Children's Services Overview Scrutiny meeting. It's now just a little after 7 and I would like to start this meeting. I'm Councillor Sarah Downey and I'm chair of this committee. As this meeting is being held in the Beehive instead of the council chair, there's a time limit for the use of this venue, which is until 9:30 p.m. If the items on the agenda are not concluded at 9:30 p.m, we will adjourn this meeting to commence Children's Services Scrutiny meeting. If this happens, we will look to adjourn what's reportedly concluded and before the start of the next meeting. I would like to remind everyone present that this meeting is being recorded for publication on the website. Officers attending virtually on Microsoft Teams, please use the raise your hand option when you wish to speak and move down. So let's move on to the first item of the agenda. Apologies for absence. Lucy, do you have any apologies?
Yeah, so we've received apologies from Councillor Snell, the Vice Chair, and we've received apologies from Councillor Watson, and we've got Councillor Penn as substitute tonight.
Item 2, the minutes. I've got some corrections that I want some comments on the accuracy of the minutes before we start. Firstly, page 6, both Councillor Watson and myself asked for a rag-rated action plan advising for all the serious case reviews. There were 50 mentions there. The 2 local child safeguarding practice reviews, peer review action plan, 26 recommendations. Nothing added to the minutes. And I was expecting that at this meeting. Also, can the recommendation 1.3 be added in bold to the Children's Services Education and Skills report? That should have read that the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee recommend that Cabinet does not move forward with these savings, which will address the council its statutory duties. That was also unresolved, and the same for the next report, the proposed budget reductions. So I move that the minutes of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 12th of October 2021 be approved as a correct record. Are there any other comments on the accuracy? So subject to those amendments. Item 3, urgent items of business. I have accepted 1 urgent item of business, and that is the local authority nurseries consultation summary paper. Michelle, are you going to give this report?
So colleagues, the summary of the consultation has been sent round in a briefing note, as was agreed at the last Children's Overview and Scrutiny. That summary report will form part of the report that goes forward for Cabinet in relation to putting the nurseries out for procurement. That report will not go to Cabinet until January, Chair. So I think that's probably all I can say at this stage. The briefing notes there, that will form part of the work around the Cabinet report, and it goes to Cabinet in January for a decision to go out to procure.
Quite a healthy response, nearly 300 responses. I had a couple of questions. Was it a digital only survey?
No, Chair, it was a digital survey, and we also had copies in the actual centres, the nurseries themselves, so that if people couldn't access, they would be able to do it.
And certainly as a non-user of pilot, my son using that, I was echoing a lot of the comments on the service, the nursery service. So 96% of participants identified it was very important to access children remotely. There's obviously great community support for the nurseries. So, has there been any impact study on the proposal this obviously we've had the childcare sufficiency review, which showed that there's a lack of places in service and chairs when the two nurseries are on. So this is a loss of another 156 places. I was wondering, out of those 7 respondents that said that they might look at increasing their vision, how many of those were schools?
There is a small percentage of schools and the rest were local nurseries.
How many local nurseries?
Sorry, Councillor, I'd have to look at some information. I haven't got that to hand in front. I can get that information for you.
Okay. There's only one that and another one that perhaps there is another one that website was
I'm happy to get you that information.
Yeah.
Charities are.
So where were we having providers that would take on the nurseries?
Can I just point of accuracy, they will remain open until sort of August. We've made that commitment, so I'll just a point of accuracy. As we said in the actual consultation report, there was feedback from providers to say that they would be prepared to open up more places. And as I've reported at committee before, we've had some initial, and I'll caveat that with initial interest in when they go to the market, there would be providers that would be interested in taking them on.
I think it's a little bit difficult to say because there's a procurement process that will begin once the paper's gone to Cabinet in January, I think January 12th. And then that will go out publicly and anyone, so it might be people who've not responded to the consultation, some of those businesses might be waiting for the procurement document market testing to start. So from January the 12th, after January the 12th, as long as the Cabinet agree that, then we can go out to the market and do a full procurement process. So as we progress with that, we'll be able to feedback.
Let's go to. Sorry.
Yes, that's what I'm quite keen about. Is the interest strong? Is there quite a few businesses looking at it?
I'm afraid it's not possible to say at this stage. So, as I said, what I would say is there has been interest, but I don't want to elaborate any more on that. Because
I think until we go out to procurement, we have had businesses express an interest, but you can express an interest, and when it goes out to procurement, if they look at the pack and the whatever the figures are, it may mean some people don't want to progress. But we have had strong interest. But until we get something and get it out there in the market, and those businesses that are interested or schools that are interested can have a look at all of the figures and get a sense of how the nurseries are running currently, we would hope that some of them would then come forward. Yeah, it'll have everything in the procurement pack, that if you wanted to take over the nurseries, it'll have all that detail in there, very sensitive information in this pack.
Away from the central, it would be difficult for them to show a strong interest or to give decisions to be made to that.
It's an indication that if that were to happen, because that's in the consultation that providers came forward and said if this goes out to market, that they would be interested. Not yet, no.
So, we agree with the notice of the group, nursery group. Item 4, does anyone have any declarations? Item 5, verbal update from the Youth Cabinet. Can I ask the Youth Cabinet to provide an update?
So we've been having our monthly meetings, we've got
New grad, this is new grad, and we're working with us. From the new year, it's been a little bit busy since Christmas. So it's going to be working with us, young people, and then we're going to be focusing on lecture mark, which starts in February, and then because of staffing, we've kind of moved our youth from into spring. So that's something that they can.
So your brand new youth cabinet, how?
How have you found just as being part of it, as you carry through some of the programs and things? Have you been able to meet those advisors that will be online?
It's been mostly online, but I've had
Because it's something like that, I sort of probably more term to bring this place. So you've got an artist that you've got.
and so we just come up with plans to so we come up with plans.
Yeah, thinking about my young people. Great idea. She would ask me questions as well, so you can surprise us, eh? I think she's going to land. Thank you. I think it will be worth it.
Recommendations to you. Brilliant. Thank you very much for coming. It's nice to be able to see you face to face for the first time. So thank you for coming along tonight. You're very welcome to stay for the meeting if you wish, but if you do wish to go, that's fine as well. So it's up to you. Item 6, report from the Thurrock Local Safeguarding Children's Partnership.
Hello everyone, can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, are you going to present the report, Jenny, rather than Priscilla? Okay.
Yes, I'm going to start and then Priscilla's going to come in after me if that's okay.
That's fine. Just before that, I just would like to say, obviously we did ask for the action plans to come to this meeting, rag-rated action plans. So I was actually expecting a written report with all of that information. Obviously that hasn't happened. So these will come to the February meeting.
And we'll certainly make sure that that happens next time, but Priscilla will be able to give a summary in terms of those actions and where we're at. And hopefully when I talk about the role of the independent chair and scrutineer and the work that the board, that the partnership has been doing over the last year, that will put it in context for Priscilla's update. So I'm Jenny Coles, recently taken on the role of independent chairperson of the Thurrock Safeguarding Partnership and scrutineer, and I thought I'd talk a bit about what that means in terms of the scrutineer's role in the partnership, but also for you to think about in the future, you know, your role, your important role in scrutinising safeguarding. And how the partnership can assist you in doing that. Just to sort of as a reminder, the reforms that happened about 3 or 4 years ago for safeguarding partnerships when we moved away from safeguarding boards, that was after the review by Sir Alan Wood and then was enshrined in legislation in the Children in Social Work Act 2017, which essentially put the recommendations that the 3 responsible partners were equally responsible for safeguarding in local areas, and they are of course the local authority because of the statutory duties, but also the clinical commissioning group that covered the footprint of the local area, obviously moving to integrated care systems now, and the police. And so the overarching responsibilities of those 3 partners equally is to coordinate safeguarding services in their local area, act as that strategic leadership group, support and engage others and stakeholders, very important stakeholders in that are members, and implement national learning from local and national serious safeguarding incidents. So we have a constitution which enshrines that in terms of those responsible partners, and that's reviewed annually. So the purpose of supporting partner agencies to collaborate also includes agencies challenging appropriately and holding one another to account effectively. So how do they do that? By early identification and analysis of new safeguarding issues, and one of them you're hearing about later on. It's not new, but that developing around violence and vulnerability, which the Safeguarding Partnership has been supporting the Violence and Vulnerability Board in their work. Promoting learning, and learning is a key thing rather than apportioning blame, but making sure the partnership is responsible for making sure that's embedded to support local services and reflecting and implementing changes when they are required. And some of those, as we all know, come from safeguarding learning reviews, but also a whole range of things, which I'll talk about what the partnership has been developing over the last year. And the information is shared effectively to facilitate timely decision making for children and families. So independent scrutiny and how that's been developing in Thurrock. You'll recall, and I know you've had reports for the peer review that took place roughly about a year ago now, and you've had updates on that action plan, and Priscilla can give a summary of that as well. And those actions have more or less been completed. And one of those was to appoint myself, independent LSCP chair and scrutineer, as being part of that challenge and holding to account system, which needed developing, and all partners agreed to that. So this has been part of the Safeguarding Partners review of the arrangements that have been going on as part of the implementation of those peer review recommendations. So why have we got arrangements for scrutiny? Well, you're all experts in scrutiny, but that broader scrutiny of the Safeguarding Partnership is really, really important. And over the years, that's been developing, but it's always been an area of challenge. But it's there to provide reassurance in judging the effectiveness of multi-agency arrangements and provide reassurance to members who are key partners in that. And also including those arrangements to identify serious safeguarding incidents and good practice to build on. So we as partners need to ensure scrutiny is objective and acts as that critical friend and promotes reflection, which drives learning and continual improvement. So how's this operating in Thurrock? And this evening is one of those methods of operating. But the peer review, and I know Sheila and Janet would support this, I think has really driven that range of actions over the last year to support that challenge and that scrutiny. And key developments, which we're still working on, but the key things that have happened, which are moving things and driving that improvement, are performance information and key performance indicators on a multi-agency basis. So I'm not just talking about key performance indicators from the local authority and children's social care, but from police and health colleagues and broader indicators as well. For example, school attendance, exclusions and so forth. It enables that regular reporting on those key indicators, and what we're developing now is a greater level of analysis of that multi-agency indicator data set some of which is done by each individual agency, but that will be brought together over the next few months in a report which can bring together that analysis, which I'm sure members will be interested in seeing as we develop that over the next few months. Quality assurance over the last year as well. There's a whole programme of quality assurance, whole variety of ways of doing that. Each individual agency has their own quality assurance process and ways of having audits and inspections, so they're reported into the Safeguarding Partnership. And the Safeguarding Partnership, from that data, identifies at least 2 deep dive audits, which they do on a multi-agency basis over a year. And the current one is around serious youth violence, and there's an external person who's been commissioned to do that alongside practitioners from across the partnership. There's also Section 11 and 175 audits, and those go out to agencies. 175 audits go out to schools, Section 11 go out to a variety of agencies of a template of questions to provide assurance around safeguarding and that they review their arrangements. And also there's feedback from children and families building on, and we've just talked about the youth cabinet, but building on what's already there in Thurrock. So a whole range of things, and the involvement of members in that, I think, is really important.
Jenny, can I ask you to sort of sum up?
Yes, I will do. So the only final thing I'd want to say is that we're, final thing I want to say is that we've got priorities for the next year, which we're developing, and we'd hope to bring those back to members to comment on over the next 3 to 4 months. Thank you. I'll pass over to Priscilla.
Thank you, Jenny. And just to go over some of the information that was requested in the verbal report. So in terms of our current reviews, we've got 4 learning reviews with action plans, and as Jenny said, our peer review that was published about a year ago. So of the case reviews, we've got Frankie case review, which totaled 14 actions to meet the recommendations from that report. 11 of those actions in that report are blue, which means they are completed and embedded, and of those 3 are amber. Now they're amber not because work hasn't started on them, but because work has started, but it hasn't been completed yet. Serious case review, Sam and Kyle. Of those actions, which were 18, we've got 16 blue actions and 2 amber actions. Local safeguarding practice review, Leo, has 1 blue action, 4 green actions and 9 amber actions. Local health review, Shay and Ashley, is a plan that's yet to be ratified. So that report, or the learning from that report, has been published, but of course we needed a multi-agency task and finish group to look at the recommendations and to draw up actions to meet those recommendations within that plan. So the plan has been put together, it just needs to go through a governance structure to be ratified, and that's the next stage for local health review, Shay and Ashley. As Jenny referred to earlier, our peer review is almost complete. Of the 26 actions, 23 of those actions are blue, which means they're completed and embedded, and 3 are amber. Work has started on all amber actions. We just need to make sure that they're completed and embedded. So as a summary of all of that, significant work has been completed across all the 5 action plans, and although Shay and Ashley is yet to be ratified, agencies have recognised the learning in those reports, and some of the actions within the action plan work has started on some of those actions because agencies recognise them and they know that it's work that needs to be done. In terms of all those reviews, what we've done is we've pulled out or identified 4 themes across the action plans as the themes that are kind of overarching that come out of those action plans. And those 4 themes are information sharing, professional curiosity, thresholds and the escalation process, and working with resistance. So working with resistance is a loose title, but that's around working with resistance to families in terms of casework. So the themes that I've just talked about have been disseminated across the partnership and are discussed at many multi-agency meetings across the partnership, and learning is in place to meet those actions identified as I've just raised in the action plans. And these have been also incorporated into awareness sessions, learning events, deep dive case audits, as Jenny again has talked about, changes in practice and procedure and protocol, and sometimes even policy. So in addition to the themes that have arisen from the case reviews, the partnership have a focus on larger umbrella areas such as neglect, non-accidental injuries of under ones, and the think family approach and exclusions. So neglect is a current priority for the partnership. And sorry.
Can I ask you to sum up now, because we're nearly at time for this item?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. Okay. So in terms of that, so we've got these overarching umbrella areas. So we've got neglect, we've got think family approach, exclusions, and some work for non-accidental injuries to under ones and children. So in terms of the work that we're doing, there's lots of work that's going on across Southend, Essex and Thurrock as local authority areas to bring some of that joint work together. We've got a Think Family Summit and Conference that's planned for the spring. We've got a Neglect Conference that's planned for the autumn. And as Jenny also referred to, we've started to collect data for our data set. We've collected data Q1 and Q2, and that information will be analysed and will form the basis of our new delivery plan and some of the priorities that we'll be setting for the coming period. Thank you.
Okay. Just to be absolutely clear, I do expect that written report to come to the next meeting, and this sort of, I'm sorry to have to chair so strictly to time, but we have to be out here at 9:30. We're very practicing. So I mean, really, this shows why a written report is necessary, so that we can all read it beforehand and come ready with questions and comments, so that we can get through these agendas. I'm afraid February's agenda is also very busy, so
okay.
we'll be clear about that. But thank you very much for your report.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your update, Priscilla. You mentioned a number of actions and a number of reports there that were amber, and amber means that they started but they're not quite being finished. Are there any of those amber actions not on course of completion within a deadline? Because just because they've been started doesn't necessarily mean that they may meet a deadline that they have. Do any of them have deadlines that they're not on track to meet?
So there's one that talks about some awareness sessions that we were to deliver, but because of the other learning events and other training and awareness sessions that we've delivered, and we've had to deliver them virtually up until now, what we didn't want is to just deliver them so that we could tick a box. We wanted to deliver them so that we had maximum attendance and we were able to show that the learning was disseminated and was meaningful. And so we've pushed those slightly forward, but that's only because we've pushed it for a term. So they will be completed, but maybe just slightly outside of the timescales.
And that's the only one like that?
Yes.
I look forward to that report coming to the next meeting then, so we can scrutinise it properly. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And welcome to your new role. Obviously, as usual, if you want to stay for the rest of the meeting, you're very welcome, but if you do want to go, that's fine too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to the next item, which is fees and charges pricing strategy 2022 to 23. Michelle, introduce this report, please.
Of course, Chair. Good evening, colleagues. This is the yearly report that comes to Overton Scrutiny that sets out the fees and charges for children's services. I think the one I'd like to draw attention to, there's been some increases over at Grangewater. There's one that looks gone up by 64%, which seems a really incredibly high number, but that's because that's a group that come in to use the site and we have to have staff on site. And historically what's happened is we've been able to manage some volunteers, or we've had other activities going on at the site at the same time. But unfortunately, going forward, that's not possible. So I'll pull that one out because that one is one that really does stand out. In the pricing structures, what we do is we test the market. So we test what other sort of areas are charging for similar type activities. They're never identical because people offer different things, but we do test the market. As I said, this is from 1st of April, the new fees and charges. So I'll probably leave it there, if I may, Chair, because as I said, happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Comments on this report? That's okay.
When we come to rainwater, so you say 64%, that's the street like the Walk Street Club, isn't it? But then any consultation with them, so what's their view?
So we've had conversations with them throughout this season, to be fair. It's been very difficult this season for them to actually been able to identify the space for them to come and do their activity. Simply because when they come, they use the whole lake. And where we've been using activities throughout the summer, it's been difficult for us to actually identify a space for them. What we have said to them is that going forward, whereas we've always managed with, as I said, volunteers or other people who are on the site, we won't have that going forward. So we do need to cut staffing costs, because clearly, if people are at Grangewaters undertaking activities, then we need to make sure we've got some cover over there, don't we?
And what's their view?
I can go back and check. I have been having conversations with them. They've been disappointed because we haven't been able to manage some space in this current sort of year. But I am in conversations with the Steve colleagues as well as other colleagues that use the site.
How does our overall general pricing of Grangewaters compare to other similar centres in the area, but also more like the eastern region, etc.?
They're pretty much on par. I have to say we're probably slightly lower than perhaps the one that's nearest to us, sort of Stabbers, which is up the road, and that's because they've got a different model. They've got a different pricing model. You know, we're trying to cater clearly for sort of local communities. So, but we do try and see what we can do around making sure that it's all sort of you know, competitive pricing. As colleagues know, Grangewaters needs to break even. That's what it has to do. So we have to set the prices accordingly.
So, I mean, looking through this report, there's probably more than half are above inflation rises. Was there any consultation at all before these price rises?
So how we set these is we work closely with the services and with people that are using the services, so they will be aware. And when we say above sort of inflation, you can see that actually sometimes it might be another £1, for instance, or another £1.50. And again, we'd have market tested. So what we'd have looked at is what's other comparable prices, and you know, where do we come in sort of thinking about other comparable prices. So we would have looked at what else is going on in that specific market, because of course this report's broken down into lots of different sections, isn't it?
The other question I had was the ones that have been removed.
Yes.
Why have they been removed? And what seems to be the commercial rate for oil and green charges? Why are they been removed?
So they were to do with Thurrock Adult Community College, and that's no longer no longer in operation. The college is still in operation, I want to be really clear, but that building no longer has that. So that's why they were removed. Some of the Grangewaters funds were removed because actually we tied them into sort of wider sort of offers. We try to sort of streamline as much as we can, actually to simplify it. So if we can try and simplify the cost, that's what we've done.
Any other questions? Any comments?
I'm just not quite clear about the process. So we without being asked to look at these review, what was the decision making body? It's not clear in the report.
The decision making is the cabinet. So if it goes forward to cabinet, if my memory serves council, it'll be February, the budget sort of council. So apologies if it's not clear in the report, but that's the next stage of sign off.
So I have two comments. I can't find. Pot 3 on page 18 says that unless in fact otherwise fees and charges can increase in line with forecast inflation. My view, Chair, is that I would be happy with that and ask the cabinet to do that. I wouldn't be supportive of any increase above that. So certainly not an increase of 64%. I'm also not happy with recommendation 1.2 that we suggest that the cabinet give authority to director to vary charges, and I think that should be done without a member approval in the same.
So, Councillor Peck, would you like to propose an amendment or just we'll take a vote on that?
Well, I would add a further recommendation that says that committee doesn't support inflation increases, and I would move a different recommendation 1.2, which is that cabinet should not give director delegate authority without the safeguard of some member input or consultation with the portfolio
I'll second that amendment motion and 1.3 recommendation. Have you got that?
Yeah.
Right, I mean, I agree. I find it hard to support above inflation recommendations. Most of them are above inflation rises. For inflation is 4.2% at the moment, so the holiday club is 10%. There's a whole lot at around 5%, 64%. So there's quite a few there. So anything above 4.2%, that would be specific. That's an answer.
Just really quickly on the directed delegated authority recommendation and what that means. Apologies if I'm incorrect, but I'm sure when I've been on committees the past couple of years and fees and prices come to committee, that recommendation is always on them. It was here last year, the year before. Have there ever been any concerns raised by members in the past with your directorate departments with regard to this? Because we've been doing this for a while, as I understand it.
So you're quite right. It is a recommendation that has been on the reports for a number of years. I'm struggling to recall a time where we had to approach the director for anything outside of what's been actually proposed. So from which I can't comment, because I think what I would say is this is probably the same recommendation in other areas. I can't comment on other areas. I can only comment on children's, and I'm struggling to recall a time where we've ever had to seek director's approval to amend a fee and charge once these have been set.
Anybody else got any comments or questions? Then let's vote on recommendations. Recommendations 1.1. We can agree, I think. The amended recommendation for 1.2.
Sorry, I was just, so is that for the delegated authority to add
Yeah.
the delegated authority? Yeah. Are we ready to vote? All in for? Yeah. Against? No, it's only members, yeah.
So
So
that's
it's
the
equal,
time.
so we get chairs, yeah, that's
So I
the
vote for. And recommendation through.
Yeah, so this elimination to rise in inflation, 4.2%, please agree above inflation. For, yeah, against, yeah, chair decision.
Let's move on to item X. The impact of COVID-19 on education and children's social care. Michelle,
Over to me again.
it's you again.
It's over to
Present
me.
your report, please.
Okay. So this builds on the report that we brought to committee in July. I am very aware that committee have been asking for a while around data and attainment, and that is not available. So that is not available. So what I've tried to produce here is a report that gives you a flavour, for want of a better word, around how schools are supporting children and young people as we go through the recovery phase around sort of COVID. So the report we actually sent out to schools. So the information has been provided by schools. We sent out a survey to our schools, and I think if you just go through some of the things that they've picked out, no surprise around emotional, mental health and wellbeing. I think this committee has been, updated on a number of occasions now about the impact on, young people's emotional wellbeing. I was very interested to hear, and of course I knew what the youth cabinet were doing around sort of, emotional wellbeing and supporting and great to hear that, from Cabinet's point of view, being able to have that opportunity to come together on Zoom, I think you were using, weren't you, or Teams, has been really beneficial, and some of the things you've done, so that's great to hear. But of course, other young people have found that more difficult. And I think what schools have tried to do is introduce a range of things that they can look at to support that. I think the other thing that really sort of struck out for me, and again, no surprises around sort of socialisation. Again, I've reported to committee in the past when I've been doing some focus groups with SEND young people. They've talked about this socialisation, and interestingly, for some young people, again, they quite liked the isolation. They've worked well with that, but for others it isn't. So I guess what I'm trying to present, colleagues, is a very mixed individual picture around how some children and young people have sort of coped sort of during the pandemic. I'm not going to go through all of these. You'd expect me to spend a little bit of time on SEND, but of course I've got SEND sort of at the end of the agenda as well, but you would expect me to spend a little bit of time on SEND. I mean, clearly some of the work that's been done to try and support this, and again it's reported to committee in a number of ways, is the consultation we did with our young people during COVID, and what's the sorts of things that we could help with, and clearly things like the socialisation, going back to what I talked about previously, and thinking about how we can bring young people together. And of course we've got the hangout for us and young people, we've got the junior hangout now that's been established. So trying to support young people, with some of those things that they've actually sort of requested. If you look at the impact on learning, which I know committee will be particularly interested in. So schools are reporting a reduction in stamina and resilience on young children. And I think that's going to be a key focus for us. I was at Schools Forum actually a couple of weeks ago, and we were actually talking about early years and what we're seeing coming through early years, that opportunity not to engage in speech and language, that early opportunity to sort of meet other little people. I think that's going to be significant for us. We need to watch that very carefully, because of course what that could then lead to is an escalation or requests for more EHCP plans. So what we're trying to do is to see what we can do around speech and language. And actually I was due to have a meeting this week to sort of look at that in more detail. So we're keeping a close eye on the early years. If I then come through to, our young people in year 11, and of course we recognise that there's still, as I sit here today, colleagues, my understanding is that there will be exams. However, that could change. You know, we're facing new variants, aren't we? I have to say, colleagues, and I'm not happy to report, but to let you know, our schools are having quite a difficult time at the minute. We've got a number of schools that are in quite significant outbreak. So again, quite a lot of disruption. Sort of colleagues, we don't know how the rest of the winter's going to play out. So again, you know, it's very difficult for our newly resident students, and I recognise that, and I think, you know, I think that is well recognised, and I think schools are trying to ensure that they're mitigating against that. So clearly, you know, I mean, mock exams are always important. They're always important, but you know, even more so when they might, if we go to teacher assessment, and we don't know yet. I don't know. If we go to teacher assessment, then they're going to be really important, aren't they? So I think there's some sort of real sort of issues around that. I picked up on the SEND. Yeah, the report gives you more detail about what's been going on. Attendance. So we're hovering at around sort of 90%, which is slightly lower than before the pandemic, but is in line with national. And we still get a lot of children testing positive. And if it's not children testing positive, it's staff. And you know, that's really difficult for schools to manage. I know, I know, I feel it. You know, we're in touch with schools. I recognise that's sort of very, very difficult. Yeah, I think probably I'll leave that side of it there. I know Janet's got the next part of the report. I don't know if you want Janet to do her part, right? So I'll hand it back to Janet then. Oh, it's fine, Janet.
Right, so in terms of children's social care, we largely moved to business as usual in terms of how we work with children. So the majority of our visits are face to face, about around 98, 95, 98% face to face. We only visit remotely by exception, so it has to be because there's a risk either to a child, family, or a member of staff, and those are all risk assessed. We're doing some hybrid working, so we're trying to have a combination of sort of face-to-face meetings, but also meetings that are both maybe some people at home and some people in the office. And so, for example, in proceedings, if we're proceedings, for example, the courts have made a decision that most of the proceedings will be hybrid. And so people are impacted to courts if necessary. We had an Ofsted focus visit in the summer. And they looked at how we adapted to COVID-19. They announced in June. They looked at audits and they spoke to everybody. What they felt was that the local authority had been creative and adapted throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and that we'd ensured continuity of service and staff being consulted and actively involved in scheduling future services in preparation for the end of COVID-19 restrictions. So we made sure the staff were there. Constant updates, that we've been really clear about what's expected. More staff are coming into the office, and we're trying to kind of have the opportunity for staff to meet each other and be together, because of course we did get new starters through the pandemic, but you know, things still continue. We want our teams to know each other and work quite closely with each other. We've been visiting children, like I said, face to face. There's been a fluctuation in terms of the numbers of contacts and referrals that we get. Depending on when we're coming in or out of lockdown. So that's changed over time. It's starting to level off a little bit more now. But there's some graphs, I've put some charts in there, some graphs in there to show what's called wave activities. You can see the remote visits, you can see around April, May, when COVID was at its peak, that we were sort of, you know, we weren't seeing the children face to face, so a lot of our visits were remote, so that would be either via Teams, if we could via Zoom, or probably on FaceTime. But then you can see in terms of our performance around visits to children in the plan, you can see that we're well above national, the Eastern region and our stat label, so that performance is pretty good. The staff have really continued to work throughout and haven't stopped some plans at all. You can see that the children looked after, and you can see there's some dips and you know, some bits that go up, some bits that go down, but generally we're performing well. So we continue to have a core number of staff. We're still doing training, we do training online. the DCS and myself and principal social worker and facilitate monthly forum meetings with practitioners to get feedback, to sort of check on people's welfare and see how they are. There was some lifting of duties during the pandemic by the government in terms of what we could and couldn't do. We largely didn't change our arrangements and continued to do things. Some of the arrangements, some of the things they said we didn't have to do, we still continued to do because we thought it was right for children. We reviewed our practices in terms of our foster carers. We had a lot of remote meetings, we now moved to face-to-face meetings with our foster carers and meeting ourselves, so they were having their own meetings together, but we're now meeting them as well, and meeting them face-to-face. Using technology, people have adapted really well to technology. I think people struggle. The people who struggle with being at home, so as much as people are working from home, not everybody's got the space at home to be working comfortably. For some people, that's on a sofa, on a bed, depending on your circumstances. So I think that people might think that we're enjoying working home, but I think some people really struggle with it. In terms of contact, that was an area that was really struggled with at the beginning of the pandemic. Making sure that children who are living at home with their parents or with their families are seeing them regularly. And you can see the contact rising as the months have gone on in terms of contacts in house, contacts in the community, individual contacts. You can see in May 21, 129 of our contacts were video contacts. You can see by September 67 were video. And some more older young people are actually enjoying those video contacts. Finding actually they work better for them, especially teenagers when they're busy and they're doing things. It means that they don't have to maybe not go to a bar or do something. They can still see their parents and maybe can see them a little bit more frequently. In terms of participation and engagement, our participation and engagement officer is increasingly working in partnership with other services such as Inspire, School Wellbeing, Open Door, Youth Cabinet, and we're working face to face with young people. Emotional lockdown roles. We've had quite a lot of activities. There's been a couple of events that we said we've got Grange Waters, some local theatre, and so we're continuing to do those things. I spoke about the court process and the things that are happening there. We've worked closely with CAFCAS, which is a court advisory service, to look at the delays. So there have been some delayed proceedings during COVID. And in terms of some of our care leavers, that's been quite difficult. Some of them have been quite isolated. Some of our care leavers, especially if they've been working in contracts that are sort of 0-hour contracts, I think that's been quite difficult for some of them in terms of maintaining work and education. But we supplied young people with laptops, we supplied them with modems to try and make it, workable for them. Even things like a couple of young people transport to bikes that they could get around, try to go to the could and keep them involved. One of the issues is obviously that the universal credit payments went up by £20, but that's now coming back down, so that's also having an impact on young people. For myself, low people that gas and electricity prices are going up, mostly it's winter, it's cold, so those are some of the things we're keeping focused on, making sure that our young people are isolated, that they're not suffering and getting the support they need. The last year's presented a number of challenges. We promoted the agile working service. We embraced the philosophy that works is the general place that we go to, and we've made business as usual with the impact on the children receive the service that they require.
Report notes a couple of times that domestic violence rose, and it said rose. So are we seeing a leveling off of that? And if we are, then I presume that's as a result of people staying at home for longer periods of time, and with us not knowing what the future holds in terms of our families going to be staying at home again if the situation gets worse. Is there anything we can do with partners or the council tackle that. I know it's a really difficult issue because it's behind closed doors and people's homes. Is there anything we can do there?
Well, we're working with our partners, so we have our set domestic abuse board, where we look at trends and look at different ways of doing things. We know that there has been a rise in domestic violence nationally, children, families and the experiences they're having. What we know is that we've had more referrals from the police during COVID. Usually, most of our referrals will come from education, but we've seen sort of a slight shift in that and more domestic violence. And some of that is around people being at home and being stuck together and not being able to go out and get to work, some of the pressures that poses. So we are trying to have those conversations. We've got a domestic abuse worker who works with men as well as with women. We're trying to make sure that we kind of create environments for people to have those conversations and speak about what's going on at home. It's really difficult because we know that people are sort of struggling with COVID and the pressures that puts on them. But we are working with the police, we are working with our set partners to sort of try and see what we can do, making sure that children are being assessed and where we can be supported.
Say you need to as much as possible. However, there are times when that isn't suitable and there is no alternative but to that. What is the impact on the staff in terms of contacting approaches what the rates?
We haven't had a large number of staff off with COVID. We've had about 6 but nobody that's we've probably got a couple of staff workers that are COVID that have had COVID for a significant time. But largely, social workers have come in, especially our assessment teams, who have to come in and do referrals every day. They're coming in those places, they haven't bolted, they've been making really good at it, and their managers supporting each other, going out, visiting families. You know, they've used PPE initially when they needed to. People have just been really supportive of each other and continue to try and find creative ways of seeing children. Seeing them on sites where we could go out and see people in the park, trying to do events where they, you know, they would see children remotely. I think some people struggle more than others. I think initially there were some people who were frightened to come out, but they did. They did come out and they got on with it. I can't think of one person who said, no, I can't do that. Nobody refused to do it. Everybody got on with it.
Can I just add to that as well, is working with the Director of Public Health, we had our frontline social workers prioritised for the vaccine once it started rolling out. So our social workers are really appreciative, and our foster carers, as well, put on a priority list to have the vaccinations, so they have them early. And I think social workers and certainly foster carers as well really appreciated, you know, the effort from the council, if you like, to make sure that they were prioritised. And we also did that with some of the schools as well, around particularly our special needs schools and resource bases. So once we were able to get more people on the list, we started looking at, you know, who was seeing most of the children face to face and who, you know, are vulnerable to getting COVID themselves, but also passing it on to vulnerable children and families. I know the social workers, foster carers and the schools really appreciated that.
And some of our foster carers are vulnerable in terms of their age, and mental physical issues. Some of our social workers were really great at supporting them, going out, taking food to them, doing shopping for them. So, and I think they really appreciated that support. And our foster carers have been excellent in terms of keeping children safe and families.
No, I think that's the second I would ask sort of the way was to recognise that I think we should really underscore, and the same does hold the schools. I mean, schools are learning, some people work in school, some people work in school. I know just very much trying to get the schools open as quick as possible, as safe as possible. But not only that, the kind of unit in a way that schools, the one working in the school and teaching is have it take root, because most schools will be working all the way through, they're actually open for children to be workers, and can move very, very quickly, very efficiently to online learning. I just want to kind of put in that question, because you can do it, can it go to a number of teachers have said to me that some young people in the system who were disengaged, disinterested, face-to-face in the classroom, and suddenly different young people when they were working remotely and can actually engage in private campaign. How do we take some of that learning as an education sector and allow different modes to engage? Not always appropriately seen the 16-year-old take to 9 o'clock in the morning, come home after 3 in the afternoon, and have other ones that you can learn. Do you think the sectors actually pick that up and develop new ways of social?
So I think it's something that the sector are looking at very closely. I think there's been an awful lot of research done around what's been some of the learning experiences of COVID, and you're quite right actually, the mobilisation of the online offer, I just think was phenomenal. Bearing in mind, you know, it had to happen really, really quickly, and they adapted and worked really, really quickly. It's fair to say some found it a lot easier than others, but what I think is great about Thurrock is for those that were finding it a little bit more difficult, they were able to ask another school for some help, and it was there, they was able to say, you know, is there things, I mean, what we did quite quickly, and I think was received very positively, the director and myself organised meetings with CEOs and the infrastructure chairs of the TAS, which is the Thurrock Association of Secondaries, and the TIFA, which is the equivalent for the primary schools, and we were meeting with them weekly, and we were saying, you know, what can we do to support? Are there things we can do virtually? Are there things we can do? And I think, as she was saying, you know, the fact that we were able to get our special schools and our resource bases through the vaccination route really quickly, and we really, really appreciative of that. So I think the learning from being able to work online will take a while to work through the system, but I actually think that there is lots of talk at the Department of Education now about how can we take some of the positive experience from what's been a really difficult experience and use it going forward. So, you know, I would hope to see sort of some of that coming out. I think part of the struggle is, as I've said, we've currently got a number of our schools that are really struggling again. We've had the list round today. I've got policy, you know yourself, you know, it's really difficult. So, but I do think there is research about what's the learning and what can we use going forward.
One more, I mean, both of you touched on particularly like talks and those that kind of thing. I just say for a lot of families, it's not necessarily not having access to the hardware, it's not being able to build connection. And found a really quite cheap way of buying pre-loaded routers that really quick cheap and very, very fast. I just wonder if there's a real easy way that looks at how we kind of deal with that digital exclusion, digital segmentation in homes. We all know that some families, there are 3 kids trying to take in turns to use one of the primary tools to try and learn. You can provide the laptops, but if you haven't got data, then it just doesn't work.
And that's something we did do, right, especially for our carers.
And I think schools will pick that up quite quickly. If there were families that were saying that, then schools would, I mean, I know a certain number of schools came to me and said, look, this is what we're going to have to do for this family, and is there anything else you can do? And wherever possible, we try to identify equipment that, you know, we could, enable young people or children and people to access. And clearly that's particularly true of our SEND group. So again, with our SEND young people, we wanted to make sure that they could sort of access. But there's so many different, different things to consider, isn't there, with what we've come through. But I absolutely recognise what you're saying around using some of the learning and some of the things that have worked well actually, and how we use that, and don't lose that, how we use that going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that, well, I mean, we've heard from previous reports that children's services has pretty much went back to business as usual allowed, which is phenomenal effort on the part of all the staff. And I know from the schools that I'm involved with that similarly in schools, at one point I went to my son's school and they were telling me that the guidelines that they were being given were changing practically hourly. So it was a constant running to keep up with what is the thing we should be doing now. With that developing situation, so there needs to be a lot of flexibility. And I'm sure all of our schools, certainly all of our children's social care staff, done a tremendous job. So I'm glad to hear that they were looked after by the council in terms of vaccinations, etc. Educationally, of course, you know, this has been the biggest educational disruption since the Second World War. I was reading the average pupils 115 days of school, and those obviously in the north that were having more time their time periods was significantly more time than that. So it's been estimated that a decade's progress of lower early attainment gap has been, you know, the best school in the world of our schools and education departments. That's been lost. So thank you very much for your report, Michelle. I do understand how difficult it is when with all of our schools being academies to actually pull this data together. So I really appreciate the efforts that you've gone to in doing that. Some important was the perspective of school government. You don't feel that you have to.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's been extremely challenging. We were saying about the people that have the devices. We actually, in the primary school, we went a lot paper-based. We found a lot of children who could do paper-based and the actual online stuff. Having two children, one at secondary, one at primary, I can say my primary school, I loved being at home. I would never go back to school. My secondary child hated it. So I had complete opposites, you know. So it was really extremely challenging when one of them flew for their work and one of them didn't. I know as a governor we had constant, probably weekly meetings, if not twice a week, trying to find out what was going on, which parents needed our support, which ones we were dropping paperwork to, which ones we were having coming in, what our numbers were. It was a crazy busy time, but I think we also lost the focus on the teachers a bit because everyone was, like you said, everyone was planning and blaming the schools not being open. And even now, these teachers are working relentlessly with challenges they've never had to deal with before. And I think everyone's focusing on the children, which is right. But without the teachers, the children aren't going to get the support and education they need. So that was a real thing for me personally. I kept needing to make sure the teachers were all right and they were there. My own school, as you both know, we are really struggling at the moment. We are. I think my own son's class, there's 8 of them that hasn't had COVID-19. My own son will be one of them because he's actually germaphobe, but I think it's going to be when, not if. So it's like a domino effect. You get one child back, the next one goes through, the next one goes through. And that is a constant battle because you've got some children that need a lot of catching up, and then other children really done well in this lockdown. One thing we picked up on yesterday was as you were saying about the early years, the phonics. So the actual pronunciation, English not being a first language, then children are a little bit more behind than we would expect them to. Reading seems to be fine, but phonics is a big thing, and that's where we've noticed a big struggle in areas. It's little things like that that we've got to work on. A lot of our children are getting in for the tutoring at 7:30 in the morning, we're giving them breakfast, we're saying, come in, we'll give you extra lessons. Some parents are embracing it and really taking it up, others got no interest. So it's kind of like, how do we work these parents that haven't got the interest, because we know that your child would really benefit from this, but without going and picking them up and getting them dressed in the morning, there's sort of a line that we can't cross. But it's been, as a governor, it's been not actually much more about the mental side, I think, for everybody. For me, that was the bit that we needed to get fundamentally right, and then everything else kind of worked in once we've got everybody calm and settled, and like I said, ever-changing guidelines is just crazy.
And then it's also hard, I think, when you hear some schools are doing Christmas fights and school discos, and we're still letting parents inside the school. And you do have a lot of Chinese whispers, well, this is classes and do that, and you know, that's the hardest bit when you're fighting fire with parents saying, actually, you know what, we can't compare ourselves to other schools. This is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it. And unfortunately, our numbers are telling you. I think we have like 200 children and staff that have had COVID in our school alone. That's a huge amount. So, I mean, far more than we ever had at the beginning of the pandemic. So it's more about trying to like fight the fire with the parents, because they're the ones that are causing a lot more damage to everyone else because of what their opinions are rather than the actual facts. I think that's the challenge as a governor and as a parent at the moment. And I refuse, I don't go into school at all anymore, but I'm refusing to go into the playground because I was constantly getting attacked about what we were doing and what we were saying, and it was, you know, it was really hard.
So can I just, I really recognise that. I think sometimes it's really interesting, isn't it? Because we talk about the children, of course we do, and we write about teachers, but also governors have played an immeasurable part in trying to ensure that schools were, where they needed to be and doing what they're doing. And I think it's, for me, it's the whole school system that has really worked to support that. And I guess it's when you've got things happening in different parts of the borough in different schools, it is quite challenging, but it's always going to be like that because it's about infection rates and so forth and so forth. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because people think, well, we really want to do that, and you keep trying to reinforce the message, aren't you? But you know, we do need to recognise the contribution governments have made without a shadow of a doubt.
Thank you.
I'll add to that. So I'm a teacher, and I changed schools in between lockdowns. So I worked in one school when we first locked down, and then changed to a different school that had a completely different way of working. So yeah, everyone just adapted. Yeah. So the first school did it this way. It was Google Classrooms. The second school now is on Teams. So it was just how different schools adapted, gave out laptops. We gave out SIM cards as well. I think the school got SIM cards. But yeah, I mean, it's just like unbelievable. You would never think that learning could be like that. And I think only now we're recognising our primary. You can see that the missed learning that these children have had, and it's going to take a while to come through, and especially with the little ones that found it difficult with online learning and the phonics and all that. We're just only a 3, and now is that impact. We're seeing that coming through. So
it's a real focus for us at the moment. So there's some focus work we want to do. We've got a strong early years team in Thurrock, so we want to see what we can do around sort of supporting that going forward. I think you're absolutely right. There's challenges at every different phase, to be honest. So it's just, but we are looking at that sort of early years sort of currently.
How do you know the parents? You go, right, that's your hardest challenge.
Can you say any more about what's being done to support families and children in their exam session?
So certainly schools will be offering a whole range of things. So they'll be offering, additional booster, might be called in some schools, booster classes. They'll be offering, whatever other support they can do. As I said, it's still, I don't think government have made their final decision, and I guess at the minute they can't because of, the current situation with COVID around whether or not they're going to stay at teacher assessment or go back to the exam process. That will come with some anxieties, and I absolutely understand that for our young people. So I think what schools will be doing in the main is offering as much in the way of catch-up or booster classes that they can for their Year 11 cohort as they head towards, the summer and looking at whatever that might bring, to be honest.
One of the things I found about boosters was outside my college we had a So students who can go to vaccination, with my assessment, I might be hard to get my split car, but right some of them I just don't get it, and I know something like that, so I don't really positive thing for young people.
That's good. How do sort of people your age, was it a big take up from people your age going to get the vaccine?
I saw quite a lot of people going and getting to the kids went, and it's just like maybe with a couple of people, so I think it's just maybe quite good time to get it in place.
My son's 12 and the take up is really low in school, really low.
I think I'm determined about it a bit more, like people engage with people and sometimes looking at us is the way to engage with young children.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes their social media around.
Oh, absolutely. One opinionated parent just spins it and it was just like this wildfire. Yeah.
That's really good feedback. Yeah, I mean, certainly, we've got issues. My son's school year 11 was out all of last week, back onto online learning. At least that's all in place now, but he's escaped COVID so far. But speaking as a mother who took some exams early last year, and because of the whole way the assessment process went, he ended up having to take his exams a month or 6 weeks earlier than he would have done in a normal exam cycle, when he wasn't fully prepared to take them then. And just hoping that the next year is not going to be like that, because it was so stressful for all of us, but particularly for him. Well, we shall see. Hopefully this new variant doesn't turn out to be as bad as it made it.
Go back and I've heard about the vaccination rollout for schools. Is there any details or?
They've done it in my son's secondary school, but he's in the new Dorset Heath, so they've only got the 2 years and only 1 year was eligible. So they've done it and they keep sending out emails saying if you want to come again, the school immunisation team will be there. But some people took it up thinking it would be an easy access for October's half term, when it actually doesn't count that it's been vaccinated. We went away, personally, we went away in October half term, we went to Barcelona, and it doesn't count, so I still had to pay for him to be fit to fly test. So a lot of people then, once they realised it doesn't count, didn't want to get their children vaccinated. That was a big thing on the Facebook pages.
Do you know roughly the percentage then?
I can only speak for the Facebook page when it went out for my son's school. There was 4 of them uptake at 120, but I don't know the figures for sure. But it wasn't very high at all.
The Director of Public Health will have that sort of information. So if we were interested in that information, we can get that and get that sent to committee, because we get that information fairly regularly from Joe Broadbent around the vaccinations, and indeed where the rise in the infections are coming is that 11 to 18 year group, as I understand it, in the Thurrock, and we get that information sent round. I think it's daily at the moment. So, and I know that there's a way of getting that information nationally to say what's happening in Thurrock about the vaccinations. So if you were interested in that, we could get that and get that sent round.
I think people's opinions are definitely changing. They're more for the vaccination for the young people. I think just because they were nervous.
Any other questions or comments? Shall we move to recommendations? 1.1 and 1.2. Agreed? Agreed. So the next item is the pupil face plan update. Sarah, you've been waiting very patiently online there. Can you hear us okay?
I can, thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. I think if you've got questions, there is a little bit of interference in the line, so if you've got questions, you might need to speak up a little bit because it's Yeah, there was a little bit of interference, but thank you and good evening. I am presenting the Pupil Place Plan update. This is something that we do on an annual basis. It was something that actually members requested that we did annually, and it's really to sort of give you some of the key highlights of things that we picked up in our latest plan, which covers the period 2021 to 2025. Some of the things I would bring to your attention is the birth rates are decreasing. So 2015 was our highest birth rate, 2015-16. That is now decreasing. And in fact, we've just received recently our 2020 birth data, which is showing another 7% decrease, so decline, which means that by the time children come to primary school age, we will have some surplus places in our primary phase, unless we have in-year admissions, of course. And of course, when the plan is developed, our Pupil Place Plan, that's normally published around June, July time. And then between that time and actually when children start school in September, at the start of the academic year, we quite often see a high number of in-year admission applications for school places. So the Pupil Place Plan really kind of helps us strategically think about where we might need to do capital works. So that might be school expansions, that might be bulge classes temporarily in particular planning areas. We consult with schools. So when we do our draft of our Pupil Place Plan, we consult with all of our schools. And this then helps us to really kind of work with them to negotiate where we might see a need for putting in additional school places in some of our planning areas. What we have got that we've identified is some concerns around capacity in the Corringham, Stanford area. We've currently got Abbots Hall that are expanding to 2 form entry, so that will deal with some of the need in that area, but we closely monitor on a monthly basis. We've also identified Tilbury as a potential area of concern in a number of year groups, and we're currently talking and have had conversations with the Gateway Learning community about expanding one of their schools there. So we were looking at Tilbury Pioneer. So those conversations will be ongoing. As I said, we look at the Pupil Place planning data on a monthly basis. So that helps us to keep an eye on where we've got vacancies across all of our schools, and then helps us to work with schools to put temporary classrooms, bulge classes in where we feel that they are needed. I think the only other thing I probably would want to highlight at this stage is our year 1 is the highest cohort that we've had after having the highest birth rate in 2015-16. And probably one of the other areas, just in terms of in-year applications, from September last year to August this year, we had over 4,000 school applications. That was for primary and secondary schools. So we had quite a considerable number. Those were made up of families that moved to England, those that moved from other local authorities to Thurrock, and those families that wanted to apply for a school place within Thurrock. So although we had over 4,000 applications, we actually made just under 2,000 offers. And that's sometimes because applications come in before parents move, they then don't move, or the families don't move to England, and so then those places aren't then offered. But it was quite a high number of applications that we received. And I think probably just the last thing I would say is just an update on the 2 free schools for secondary provision. So that's Thames Park and Orsett Heath. As you'll be aware that they have opened in their temporary locations. Thames Park is due to open in its permanent site, which is located next to Palmer's College. Probably if anybody has sort of driven around that area, you've probably seen lots going on for that school. They are due to open September 2022. Orsett Heath Academy is recently been through planning actually and secured their planning permission, and they are due to open in their permanent location by the rugby club in Easter 2023. We've also got Treetops Special Schools, the specialist provision there, who have, worked fantastically with us. We've done lots of work with them, creating additional classroom space. So they've taken additional children this year. They will open in their permanent site again, Easter 2022. So then they will be taking their full admission number by that point. And I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you, Chair. If anybody has any questions.
And I know we're proposing to producing this report, and because of the large fluctuation between conditions, it's quite balanced information, but I think we've done well over the years to produce accurate. Anyone got any questions?
Do you ever, once you do the add bulge classes to school, do you ever run a natural course and you remove them? I've never known that. This is the question.
Yeah, so thank you. What we normally do, if we put temporary classrooms on, so it might be a particular, we need to add a class of 30 to a particular year group, that might be a reception. That bulge class, so that could be a temporary classroom that we place on that site, stays until that year follows right the way through the school until they finish at year 6. Sometimes it could be that actually we need to create, it's part of a permanent build, so it could be a permanent classroom that is added to that school, and then obviously that stays on site. But once that bulge class moves through, that's it, unless we ask them to, that particular school, to take additional children again, if the need is there.
Look at the numbers, definitely the next sort of 5-year forecast, it's not going to happen, is it?
For putting in additional places for primary or secondary?
Bulge classes, yeah, I mean.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, oversubscribed, aren't they? Yeah.
Yeah, so if you look at the pupil place plan, generally where there's lots and lots of red, that means that we've got some issues and we've got concerns and we need to do something in particular planning areas. I think you'll see from the plan at the moment there aren't really, apart from the areas that I've highlighted already this evening, Corringham and Stanford and Tilbury, there isn't anything at the moment that's of concern in terms of us not being able to meet our statutory duty to provide pupil places. So, but it is something that we monitor, as I said, on a monthly basis, because, we will get in-year school applications. Those applications then, are offered, and that reduces vacancies that we might currently have. So, we constantly, are making sure that we have got places in the borough.
Thank you ever so much.
Yeah, really welcome the yearly refresh. I mean, I've been about long enough, 12 years ago, when we didn't have proper pupil place planning, and that led to constantly trying to react to situations as they arose, and real problems in places like Chapel 100 at that time was expanding very, very quickly. So, it's an essential piece of work, and I think it looks comprehensive, and it looks good to me. I really do welcome the yearly refresh. Michelle, sorry, if I read the introduction, so page 3 of the document, page 77 of the agenda, looking to ensure parental choice. Parents can have a choice here. They can express a preference. Any use your choice. Realistic expectations, as well as parents are concerned, and these documents demonstrate. So I would ask.
Thank you for the work. It's a very complicated calculation all the time, which is a constantly moving target that you're having to hit. So thank you for all the hard work that goes on behind the scenes to produce that. Recommendation 1.1, can we agree? Review the PPP, noting the areas with additional school policies going. So now moving on to item 10.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, I should say if you want to leave the meeting, you've been waiting there patiently.
That's okay.
You feel free to go, but if you want to stay, that's fine.
Thank you.
So moving on to item 10, send inspection outcome, the written statement of action update, and Michelle has got, I'm not sure whether to call it exciting news. Michelle has got big news for us.
We've got good news. So normally, colleagues, I would sit here and talk you through some of the work we've been doing, but actually on Monday we received a call from Ofsted to say that they are undertaking their revisit in relation to the 3 areas that are within our written statement of action. The process is they will actually come on site on the 13th, 14th and 15th of December. By tomorrow at 3 p.m, I need to have uploaded all of our information around how we've addressed the areas that were in the written statement of action. I think terminology is really interesting here because what they want to see is sufficient progress. And, you know, it's that sufficient progress that we're really challenging ourselves about. So our key document is our impact statement, which covers the sort of 3 areas. As part of evidence, we will be putting in this update to the committee. I think one of the things that was which they identified when they visited was around governance, you know, oversight and governance. And I think what we were able to show with evidence is that children's overview have taken this incredibly seriously. It's come to every, you know, ONS. There's been some real scrutiny on it. You know, RAG rated. I think we had early conversations about we wanted a RAG rated document, got a RAG rated document. So this will form part of our evidence. I have to say this whole suite of evidence that we're sort of having to submit. So yes, we've had our Ofsted sort of call. So I think I'm not going to say anything at that point. I'm actually going to hand over to the director. I'm not going to say anything at that point. I'm just going to say we've had the call. I don't know, Sheila, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, the team have worked incredibly hard over the last two bit years since the last inspection. It's not just of us, it's health, but it's education, health and social care. So our partners are really involved in this. You know, we've got a really big agenda for the 3 days that they're coming in on site, so it's not virtual, which we're quite happy with. Some of their meetings will be virtual with parents, for example, and with children and people. They've said they want that on the screens, and that's fine. So we're just really getting all our evidence together this week. To send through. We've got 3 o'clock tomorrow. It's the deadline to get everything off to them. It goes to their portal. They'll meet with us again on Friday to say what they think of what they've got so far. They've got enough. Do they want more? You know, what's their thinking? And then next week we'll have more conversations with Ofsted and CQC. So CQC as well as Ofsted. So it'll be a really good look at those 3 written statement of actions, like we say. And at the end of it, it's not a judgment as such, but they'll say whether they think we have made sufficient progress against each one of those written statement of actions, and there will be a report. It's like an extended letter really, but they'll go through each of them and say what evidence they found and or what their view is about how far the partnership has come and that we've delivered against that.
And I'm sure we all want to wish you the very best for that. And can you just explain, Michelle, because I know you were explaining to me it's not a re-inspection, it's a revisit.
It's a revisit. So the inspection team are really clear. It's a revisit because they're revisiting the areas that they identified as serious weaknesses when they did their last re-inspection. They're very clear that it's a revisit. So they will look at those 3 areas. As Sheila said, it's a really compact timetable. They want to see colleagues from schools. They've got colleagues from health that they want to see. Again, parents, young people. Quite a tight timetable, as well as clearly sort of wanting to speak to Sheila and myself and other sort of senior colleagues. So yeah, that's where we are. What I did want to just say was that one of the nice things we've been doing, and I do want it reported at committee, is we've been, on our local offer, we've been designing a mascot. So we've gone out to schools around designing a themed mascot, and I'm delighted to say that both the chair and vice chair of Children's Open Scrutiny have said that they'll judge it for us. So we're very excited about what the outcome of that's going to be. I've not even seen them, to be fair. So as I said, so no pressure.
I've done my bit already.
Oh.
So I won't give it away.
No, but I just think we've really tried to do some engagement work and just some nice things to do, which will be nice forms of evidence around what we've been trying to do around sort of engagement and also recognising done an awful lot of work on quality. That's within the report around plans. Making sure our annual reviews are where they need to be, making sure we are listening to what parents are sort of saying to us. So so we will present our evidence and we will present our journey and see where it leads us.
I mean, on the subject of mascot, it was a very, very difficult decision. Because they were all so good for different reasons. So, but it was a lovely task to be asked to undertake. So I did enjoy doing it.
I'm glad that was you.
It was very difficult to decide. So they all had their merits, and but I did make a decision. I'm not sure council says, but back to that. I don't know what the result is.
Yeah. No, but thank you for engaging with that. It's just an example, isn't it, of some of the things we've tried to do, sort of going forward. So yes.
And as Michelle says, we have definitely scrutinised the written statement of action. And all of the actions in that are now green, and many of them are blue, so fully embedded. So there's been a tremendous amount of work that's gone on that, as Sheila has said, and we should revisit.
Thank you very much.
I don't have any particular comment on the report. I just want to echo what the chair just said and thank yourselves and the wider team for the work we've done throughout, because I've been on this committee since 2018, so we've had a lot of drag-rated reports, and it feels like in a couple of weeks' time it's going to be a combination of a lot of hard work, and I'm sure we're all rooting for you, and I look forward to seeing the outcome of that.
Thank you.
Best of luck to the team.
Thank you.
We agree the recommendation 1.1 on page 124. And you can scrutinise the work that's been undertaken during the period outlined in the report and prosecution challenge. Okay, I'm not sure if we have.
Jo's just on her way.
Oh, right, she's just on her
I've
way.
just texted her, so she knows that she's going to join now. I originally said 45, but and then she is.
So the next item, just to let everybody know while we're waiting for Jo, and it may be that Jo may be able to answer your earlier question, although she might not be prepared for that about the vaccinations and the school vaccinations.
She may well be able to answer that actually, because she does the information regularly.
So we'll ask her that one when she comes, but she's here to speak on the update on the progress and recommendations in the annual public health report of serious youth violence and vulnerability. So that's on pages 167 to 168.
Just while we're waiting, it's a really timely piece of work for us in the authority. Really fed into the rest of the work that we're doing, you know, in terms of the response to the increase in serious youth violence. So it's really, really helpful piece of work. Yeah, and was picked up positively in the Ofsted focus visit that we had in June, July, which was on extra familial harm, and yeah, picked up on the public health approach to serious youth violence. So
it's a tremendous piece of work by the council.
Excellent, really excellent.
Very comprehensive and the perspective from which they've looked at it as a holistic.
Yeah, no, it's really, really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, we could do the work programme. Okay, let's just do item 12 while we're here. So Lucy, can I ask you to go through the work programme?
I think February has been very busy. Yeah, meeting 8th of February, I think. There's quite a lot on there. But obviously happy to add anything as members wish. Obviously remove items or make items briefing notes again as members or officers wish.
Any comments, anything that the members would like to add or remove, or things that we think could come as maybe briefing notes? It's a very packed agenda again, although I guess the written statement of action you may hopefully not be there.
Or we could probably have an update on the outcome of the revisit. We should have the letter by then, shouldn't we? By the 1st of February. Sometimes takes a bit of time, but I'm sure we'll have it by then.
So if we could change the written statement of action you use them to an update on the revisits.
Oh, here we've got the update on the impact of the COVID-19 again. I'm just wondering if we're going to have time, because I think both June, January, and in December, there'll be very little change before February.
I
when
think
the report's due.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think we've had quite a full report today. We did have quite a long discussion with quite a few perspectives being added to that. So I'd be happy if members are happy for that to be dropped from the email.
Might be a bit more time for the LSCP.
Yes, that would be good.
I'm conscious, Chair, if I may, I've got a few things on here that potentially if members were happy to go to briefing notes. I'm wondering about Inspire. I think that could be a briefing note to committee about the work of Inspire. If the committee felt that was appropriate, and just.
Could you give us a brief outline of what was going to be in that report?
It's normally, what we normally bring, Chair, is a yearly report around the work of Inspire and what they've done over the last sort of year, really. So it could lend itself to a briefing note, actually. If members have got any comments on it, then they can just ask, can't they?
Yeah, or they can have it as an item of urgent business.
Yeah, like we've done, yeah. So that seems to me to be one that could go to a briefing note.
Is that okay with the other members? Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Can I clarify, Chair, as well? Apologies, me again. I'm conscious we've got this home to school transport. I know we had a conversation, didn't we?
Yeah.
When I brought it last night. I just want to be clear what committee would want from that. So if I could have some clarity, it doesn't have to be now, Chair. It might be that you've got it clear, and when we meet, you can say this is what I've been looking for, Michelle.
Yeah, we can do that.
Thank
offline
you.
Then,
I appreciate that. I just want to make sure I bring what committee want rather than a report I think committee might want. So if that's okay, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
I haven't heard back from Jo yet. I can call her into the meeting. and request that she joins. Hopefully she's online.
Just to say that there was a couple of requests from Jenny to bring some items to the agenda. There was one on obesity, maternity obesity, and there was another one on breastfeeding. But because the agenda that we've got for children's services is they're so hefty at the moment, we've only got one meeting left, so there wouldn't be a chance to adjourn to another meeting. Lucy having a meeting so that we could hear those extra reports.
Hi, Joe.
Hello.
Okay. Can you hear and see us okay?
Yes, I think so.
Hello, Joe. I'm very pleased that. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, just about.
Just about, okay. I'm very pleased that we've managed to have time for your item. Can I ask you to introduce your report, please?
Yeah, sure. So the annual public health report into youth violence and vulnerability was completed by Ian Wake when he was Director of Public Health back in December 2019. So that's obviously 2 years ago since the report was published. Obviously, since then, we've been quite busy with COVID, and so the setting up of the Violence and Vulnerability Board to take forward the recommendations of the panel was delayed until this summer. The board has now been set up with myself chairing it, and we've had 2 meetings, and we've got the 3rd meeting next week. We've been establishing the work programme and the governance for the role of the board. There's obviously a lot of work going on in this area. There's also a lot of groups that have a role in this area, both in Thurrock and across the wider Essex structures as well. So we've done quite a lot of work making sure that we're adding value and not duplicating. There's already a large amount of activity in this area, particularly around the areas of secondary prevention and tertiary prevention, so direct action with individuals at risk and direct action with perpetrators and victims. So we've spent quite a bit of time reviewing the recommendations of the report, matching activity that's already in place to the recommendations, and identifying areas where we need further work to be done, such as the recommendations around surveillance, potentially some further work on exclusions, etc. So the Violence and Vulnerability Board has, we have developed an action plan that relies heavily on the recommendations in the annual public health report, but we've also added a 5th area of action, which is around communications and engagement, to help coordinate and raise awareness of the work going on in this area. So the first strand of work was around surveillance, so understanding the nature of the problem. There's been a lot of work done by the police in particular on this and actions addressing their findings, but what we're adding from a public health point of view is to pull together different sources of intelligence, integrate various different data sets and try to get a more complete picture to both understand the issue but also to direct some of our preventative action and target that a bit better. So that's probably been one of the largest gaps that was found in the annual public health report. We've made some progress on that. We've had some difficulty finding recruiting an analyst with the right skills and capacity to do this. We've now got someone in post who actually started this week. So they're going to be working with Claire Moore to pull together an integrated data set and a predictive model for risk of becoming involved in violence, whether as a perpetrator or a victim. So I'm confident over the next 6 months we'll make quite a lot of progress in that area. The second area was around primary prevention, so protecting against involvement in violence. So that's about enhancing protective factors for children and young people, and also reducing risk factors for children and young people. And a lot of the action going on already in this area is work with parents, and I think appended to the paper you've got one of the leaflets that have been prepared for parents, and also work with schools in this sort of preventative arena. The secondary prevention focus was around direct intervention with those most at risk of involvement, and this encompasses a lot of the youth outreach work that's been done in the borough by various groups, and also the extensive work that's been done over previous years to reduce school exclusions would fall into this category as well. And then the tertiary prevention, where there's an awful lot of work going on, as we know, in the borough, intervening directly with perpetrators and victims to reduce harm across the board. So the extensive work that's been taken, action on gangs, the YOS service and all the work that they do, extending work with families who have young people who are involved in violence in one way or another, and essentially a holistic offer is being developed to better encompass youth justice, elements of mental health services linking in to the proposals as well. So in summary, that's what the action plan covers. A lot of this is underway. We've also, you'll see from the paper, got a number of projects that are in development, and I think we've got a really comprehensive action plan in development around this area that should pick up on all the gaps that were identified in the annual public health report. There's also obviously the recent Ofsted inspection and the findings from that. So I think we continue to develop our understanding in this area, and through various means, and also through our work with the Essex Violence and Vulnerability Unit, and we're closely involved in the Essex-wide work, obviously, that's going on in this area as well.
I can't imagine what your workload's like at the moment between the pandemic and the health and wellbeing strategy, and chairing this board as well. So thank you for all your hard work and the hard work of your team. This was a fantastic report, very comprehensive. It was interesting to hear the update. Before I open to questions, can I just clarify that my understanding of primary, secondary and tertiary prevention, I didn't quite get the distinction between those three levels. Could you say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is an approach, I guess, that's been developed by public health, particularly from our work in health pathways and determining health outcomes. So it might be easier to understand if I actually explain it in terms of, for example, cardiovascular disease, so whether that's heart disease or circulatory diseases. So primary prevention will be something that reduces your risk of developing a cardiovascular disease in the first place. So things like physical activity, a healthy diet, not smoking, that's primary prevention. So it happens before the disease occurs. Secondary prevention is probably what people would often view as the sort of treatment that you might get from your GP. So if you're diagnosed with high blood pressure, for example, you might be have medication prescribed to lower your blood pressure and lower your risk of adverse outcomes from that high blood pressure. So it's prevention, but it's prevention slightly further along the pathway. And then tertiary prevention, for example, would be if someone has a TIA, which is like a mini stroke, and then action taken at that point to avoid a more serious major stroke that would have very adverse outcomes. So it's prevention at different stages along a pathway. So in terms of, you can apply that concept, in many ways. So in terms of violence and vulnerability, our primary prevention is protecting children from getting involved in activities that predispose them to more serious involvement in violence in the first place. So that is things like working with families, a lot of the work that's done in schools about emotional intelligence, managing emotions, that kind of protective activity. Secondary prevention would be where young people maybe have been identified as being on the periphery, perhaps of gangs, or at risk for one reason or another, perhaps involvement with drugs, and working with them directly to stop them getting further involved in violent activity. And then of tertiary prevention is where we have perpetrators who are known and who are perhaps being supported by the Youth Offending Service to try and stop their involvement getting even worse. Does that make sense? Does that make it clearer?
That's made it very much clearer. Thank you. That was a great explanation. So thank you for that. That makes it very clear. Any questions from members or other? Is there anything that Children's Services would, anything that officers would like to add?
If possible, if you don't mind. I wanted to pick up really, Jo, on some of the work, the links with the violence and vulnerability unit, sort of the processes. I think that's been really positive for Thurrock, and a good example of that is that we've managed to secure some funding for Olive Academy to do some outreach work in our schools with children who are at risk of permanent exclusion. Because what we know is that's a high risk factor. So we've managed to secure some money. Oliver doing some outreach work with secondary schools, and I think, you know, we're waiting to see some of the impact on that. But I think those opportunities that the violence and vulnerability unit have afforded us have been really positive. And I have to say that is as a direct result of this report. This report was so well received across the whole of sort of Essex, Southend and Thurrock that, you know, it was such a positive sort of piece of work that it has really opened funding avenues for us. So I think that just wants to report that to the committee.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I mean, sort of having been on committee when the original piece of work was presented, and also in health scrutiny as well, through there, it was a phenomenal piece of work, and I'm really interested to see how that's developing. Councillor Kent.
Yeah, I was going to say the same actually. Just can't remember when it was that Ian Wake was the committee. It was long ago, I think, because it was face to face. And just remember then, just kind of reflecting on what they've done in Glasgow some years before, when they were the first area to look at violence as a approach. So although it's early days, what we've seen in the report are lots of outputs, but so far not many outcomes. Can you just point us to some kind of tangible outcomes that we've seen? And I think the second part of my question is the one that I put to Ian Wake previously. If this is going to work, we've got to be the long haul. This has got to be kind of a 5-year or even longer program. Is there still a commitment that we keep to this approach for as long as it takes?
Sorry, I didn't really catch that. I couldn't hear that very well.
So there's lots of activity in the report, which is great, but they're all kind of outputs, aren't they? As of yet, not tangible outcomes. I know it's really early days, but are there any of those tangible outcomes that you can point to? The second is, where this approach has worked well in other areas, for instance in Glasgow, it's because they've stuck with it for the long haul. And I'm just looking for that commitment that will keep to this approach for as long as it takes.
So yeah, on your second point, I absolutely agree. This is quite a long-term project, and those dividends from, say, the prevention that happens within, say, primary schools now. We're going to see the benefit of that, yeah, in 5-10 years time. So it absolutely requires that long-term commitment. And you're right, in places like the West Midlands and Glasgow, these are long-term projects. So absolutely, public health is committed to this, I guess. And we need to keep the entire system committed to this. I agree with Michelle that the Essex Violence and Vulnerability Unit has been incredibly helpful, I think, in terms of building the infrastructure across a whole range of organisations around this, and I think that should have great longevity. So yes, I agree with you on that second point. Your first question, it's harder to answer to point to something that has changed directly because of this report since it was written, because actually there's been a lot of work going on anyway in this area. So we know that there's been a lot of work happened around some of the gangs, particularly one of the gangs based in Grays, over the past few years, and that's been a real multi-agency piece of work that's had a big impact there. So I think a lot of the successes we've had so far are not down to the input of public health and are down to the work that was going on anyway. What I hope that this report can add is build on the work that's already going on, and I think the biggest potential we can have is that using that intelligence in to direct a much more preventative and holistic approach. I mean, I think in terms of the big successes, if the committee wanted some more detail, I would suggest that getting Jason Reed in particular to talk about some of the work that the YOS has been involved in would be probably quite helpful to the committee. I have to say that my involvement in this has been quite recent, and although this is a lot of work going on in this, it's our colleagues such as Michelle Cunningham, Jason Reed in Children's Services, and also in the Community Safety Partnership that have really driven a lot of this so far.
Jo, can I just ask a question about one of the recommendations in the report? Because recommendation 1.2 asks that members contribute to the delivery of this agenda, ensuring that communities have a voice within this agenda. Can you clarify sort of what you were expecting to get from the committee in terms of that recommendation? Because I wasn't quite clear what you were asking for there.
Yeah, so I think it's, well, firstly, obviously about the scrutiny function and assuring yourselves that we are engaging appropriately across the community, but also the committee members' role as representatives of the community, and that you know your communities very well, and just bringing that insight to bear, I guess, on this agenda. So the Violence and Vulnerability Board itself is a professionals board, and we will engage outwards through a lot of other means, but I think it's really important that councillors and groups such as this one can influence and inform our work as much as possible. So I guess it's just any insight that you have as councillors to inform our work, that we maintain an open channel there and a dialogue.
I mean, I think from my own experience in my own ward, in the run-up to Christmas last year, we had 2 knife-point muggings, and the police response to that was, I mean, it was very difficult because we were in COVID and we were in lockdown as well. There was obviously a lot, you know, there was a lot more duties that the police had to perform during that time. It was difficult to meet with people, etc. But I had to write to the chief inspector to get those followed up. So obviously we've got this work that's going to come through and make a difference over time. But also, certainly for my community, people were very, and my ward parents were very angry and very frightened for their children. And then, of course, we did have that stabbing of a 15-year-old boy by a 14-year-old boy quite soon after that in Blackshot. And it just highlighted for me that it highlighted for me really that there was this gap, certainly within the police side of it, where issues weren't being nipped in the bud before they became more serious. I mean, I don't know whether it was the same person and that was a progression, but certainly the seriousness of that crime. And as a result of those incidents and further conversations that I had with residents in my area, there are lots of stories of children being held up at knife point and there not being a police response that's come from that, either through operational pressures or I'm not sure why that didn't happen. But I spoke to a lot of parents around that time who were really worried about their children and also quite angry that there wasn't the resource there and there wasn't the resource coming to deal with what were quite serious incidents really, and obviously very frightening for any parent of any child. So presumably this would sit within the tertiary area of the report, would it, where you're working with known offenders? Because the other feedback that I got from the community very clearly was, you know, we know who the people, the kids are that are doing this, we've reported it to the police, we've told the police, but they didn't see the action happening, and that being addressed. And that's where a lot of the anger in the community was coming from. So, I mean, that's my experience in my ward. I don't know if other councillors have had similar experiences, and whether that's helpful in terms of the voice of migrant communities that we recently found.
Thank you. There's probably a couple of things there, isn't there? That it just strikes me that the work we've been doing around the health and wellbeing strategy and the consultation on that, one of the things that has come back from that is fear of crime and fear of violence being an issue as much as the experience of it. It's not necessarily the same thing, but there is a lot of fear and concern out there in the community. And so the other thing is about, I guess there's quite a lot of confidentiality around a lot of these processes, and it may not be immediately obvious action that is being taken, but one of the reasons why we felt it was important to add a sort of communication engagement stream to the violence and vulnerability board was to look at the communications and engagement, because there seemed to be a lot of communications coming from a lot of different places, but actually making sure that that was perhaps meaningful and conveying the messages that we needed to convey to the community and the community wanted to hear.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know where in the strategy that kind of gap fits, but I think there's still a sense that there is a gap there in terms of people reporting, but they're not really seeing action, and people feeling frustrated because they've told people who the perpetrators are, and nothing seems to happen. That's definitely been a theme that's been around for over the past year. Sheila?
I think if things like that happening in the community, Michelle Thompson and Michelle Cunningham, I've got the wrong Michelle Cunningham and the community safety team would be someone worth contacting, because they work with, if you like, I know for the residents it probably feels like it's high level, but if it's not been taken forward, then Michelle and her team have got anti-social behaviour officers and people like that can, and they've got very good links with the police, with local police, who may be working particularly around youth violence, youth crime. So that's a really good place to start. If you have things and people locally are saying this isn't working. Yeah, I know Michelle and her team do a lot of community work.
Yeah, I've worked a lot with Michelle.
Oh,
so yeah, yeah, I do always go to Michelle as a first point of call really.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a great officer and she's very responsive.
Yeah,
But I think there's still this feeling sort of within the community that when something does happen like that, which is quite serious, there's some kind of gap in the communication that hopefully now we're going to have more sessions like Coffee with Cops. Obviously COVID has affected this because we haven't been able to have those face-to-face meetings. That might provide some reassurance going forward, but in terms of that recommendation, that would be my feedback from my experiences in my ward. I don't know if other councillors have had similar experiences.
I actually just have something that Sheila said, and that's contacting Michelle Cunningham and the community safety team. I know Sheila said that you had a lot of contact with her, and I had as well in terms of issues in Connolly Town Centre. And she's very responsive and is a great resource for that team to remain in contact with the council.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously, you know, when you've got a 9-point mugging, that's a police matter. So it sort of goes a little bit beyond social behaviour. Although Michelle's very responsive.
I just think they've got very good links with police in that area. So, but you say you're already connected to Michelle, so that's really good.
Yeah, Michelle talk a lot.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to say a bit about the work that I know that you've been working with the police.
Yeah, so we felt kind of like the relationship between the police and young people was in there. So we started, so we felt like their social media maybe wasn't targeted young people as much as we'd like it to be. So we would be doing like YouTube videos, raising awareness around certain types of crime. Because I feel like if young people are more aware, then that's important for them to do things.
That's great, really good work that you're doing there. Certainly, I would highly recommend live chats for reporting any incidents to the police. I don't know if that's something that young people, we're telling young people about, but it's been going on quite well with a lot of our residents and a lot better than the getting through on 101. Okay. If there's no further questions, let's move to the recommendations, 1.3 to 1.1 to 1.3. Are we agreed?
Chair. Yeah. While you've got Joe, did you want to ask that question?
Oh yes. Joe, sorry, we're putting you on the spot a bit, but earlier on when we were talking about school response to COVID, Councillor Tandy had a question about the vaccination programme in schools. I don't know if you want to say what your question was, Councillor Tandy.
Yeah, just wanted to ask how you feel about the interest with the vaccination with the parents for the kids. Is it successful? Do you feel it should be pushed more, or are parents not really bothered with it?
I think there are mixed feelings, I think, in all honesty. I think we've seen with vaccination uptake across all ages. There have been some people who've been very enthusiastic, who've been very keen to get the vaccine, have got it very quickly. Other people who have waited to see how it's rolled out and have taken their time to make a decision. And then some people who've just decided it's not for them. And I think in terms of parents and children, that's exactly the same. So we've got about 33%, so about a third of our 12 to 15-year-olds have now had the vaccination. A lot of that has been through the school rollout, but they can also get it through the online booking system now to some of the walk-in vaccination centres. So the majority has been delivered through the school age immunisation service that goes into schools, and so the rollout to some extent is determined by the capacity in that team. So the fact that it's only a third that's had it so far doesn't mean it's only a third of families that want their children to have it. Not all children have been able to have it as yet, partly because of the timetable of going into schools, partly because we've had a lot of COVID in young people. So a lot of young people would have been either out of school when the vaccination service visited their school, or been within the 28-day window post-COVID when you can't have the vaccination. So I think it's a mixed picture, and I think there are across all groups, like I say, some people who do have their concerns about it, but we have got the majority of people who've been offered the vaccine are now taking up both first and second doses, and I would hope that that will be mirrored in our young people.
Is the plan still only one dose for children, Jo? And can you say why that is? Why do children only have one dose and adults have two?
So originally there was some concern about the risk of complications in young people, particularly the risk of heart-related complications versus the risk of having severe COVID, because young people generally, if they don't have other underlying health conditions, don't get COVID very severely. So that's why it took quite a long time for JCVI to recommend that children aged 12 to 15 should get the vaccine. Since then, there's a lot more data come out, and I think I'm right in saying, I'm now questioning myself here, but I'm pretty sure that the latest guidance from or advice from JCVI to the government was that 12 to 15-year-olds should now get a second dose, because that risk balance actually isn't as bad as it was feared it might be. I think that's where we are, and there's still no indication yet that younger children will get it, but I do know it's something that JCVI are looking at, so that may well be something that comes down the line.
Am I right in saying there are separate trials for children, separate trials before the vaccination is offered to young people?
So I think there were, and I think particularly in the United States, because they started vaccinating young people under 18, I think before most other countries did. So quite a lot of information came out of their vaccination programme, because they've had quite a rapid rollout. So there have been trials, but there's also been this kind of real world data that's accumulating now as well.
Right, so that's good to hear that they're going to get the second dose.
I think that's right. I'm now doubting myself. I shall check.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Jo, for that report. And we've already got through the work programme, so thank you everyone. That concludes the business of the meeting this evening, and I now declare the meeting closed at 21:18. I didn't think we were going to get the last one.